What If and Creature Commandos are the most recent animated series from Marvel and DC. They ended up being released at the same time, and the heads of each studio claimed these shows would be key to the future of their respective universes. James Gunn said that Creature Commandos would mark the beginning of the new DCU, and that it would set up the new canon. Meanwhile, Brad Winderbaum, Marvel's executive producer, promised that the ending of What If would connect directly to Doomsday and the rest of the multiverse saga. In the end, things didn't really turn out that way. But what matters is that the two shows had very different receptions. Creature Commandos was a pleasant surprise. It got spectacular reviews. Fans loved it. Its ratings went up week by week thanks to amazing word of mouth. And Warner already confirmed a second season because people want to see more of these characters. On the other hand, the third season of What If was a massive disappointment. Almost no one watched it. Most of the episodes were awful. And honestly, we're all glad it's over. And we don't have to watch any more episodes. This isn't a coincidence. There are 4 reasons why Creature Commandos works and What If doesn't. And no, none of those reasons have anything to do with the animation style. It's obvious that Creature Commandos looks 10 times better because it uses traditional animation instead of those 3D models. Did you really think I was going to say something that obvious?
Of course not.
The first reason is how the characters are handled. If people don't like the characters in a superhero show, it's impossible for them to like the series as a whole, no matter how interesting the concept or premise might be. The writers of What If actually understood this in season 1. They dedicated an entire episode to a Doctor Strange variant who turned into a villain after losing the love of his life. That was a character we could understand and empathize with, but it feels like they completely forgot about that since season 2. They not only ruined Supreme Strange's arc, but also stopped introducing any new characters who could hold their own. Episode 6 of season 3 was a great chance to explore Shang-Chi's relationship with his sister or show how Kate Bishop reacted to her parents' deaths, but the episode fell flat. It didn't work as a compliment to the Shang-Chi movie or the Hawkeye show, and the only thing you remember 5 minutes after watching it is the Iron Fist cameo.
That's it?
Of course, this isn't just What If's fault. Part of the blame goes to the MCU's schedule. Season 3 was originally supposed to come out after Ironheart, but due to delays, that show is still months away. That means the only time we've seen Riri Williams was in Wakanda Forever, where she had a side role and wasn't that interesting. If she'd already had her own series, her episode in What If would have made more sense, because people would have been excited to see her. To their credit, the writers tried to humanize the Watcher in the last 2 episodes, but we didn't learn anything new about his personality that we hadn't already seen in earlier seasons. If the rest of the cast had been better developed, Uatu's showdown with the other Watchers might have carried more weight, but who the hell cares about Birdie? Kahori does nothing this season. They don't give us anything new about Captain Carter, except that she saves the day again using the power of love. And they don't even tell us if this version of Storm is the same one from X-Men 97 or another variant. They didn't even care to explain how she got Thor's hammer.
Disappointed!
Creature Commandos, on the other hand, treats its characters right. James Gunn and his team knew they were starting at a disadvantage because they were making a show about really obscure characters. This time, Gunn didn't add cameos from the main villain of the saga, like he did in Guardians of the Galaxy, and he didn't bring in fan favorites like Harley Quinn, who had a big role in his version of Suicide Squad. In Creature Commandos, they had to make us care about the whole team from scratch, and they nailed it. At first, most of the characters are awful people. They're murderers, narcissists, and psychopaths. The only likable one is Nina, the fish girl who's shy and innocent, but the show doesn't focus on her. That would have been too easy. The character with the most screen time is Frankenstein's bride. She's tough, stubborn, cynical, rude to everyone, kills innocent people without a shred of remorse, and more than once says she'd be willing to wipe out humanity if necessary, because she's a monster, not a human. Still, we empathize with her when we learn her backstory. She suffered terribly at birth, knows she was never supposed to be born in the first place, and was hunted and harassed by Frankenstein for decades.
That is so sad.
Seeing everything these monsters have gone through helps us understand them as people. We feel bad for them and get why they act the way they do, but that doesn't mean we excuse their atrocities. It's the same thing that happened with Supreme Strange in season 1 of What If. The second reason is filler, which can be forgiven in a season with over 20 episodes, but not in one that doesn't even have 10. And I know what you're going to say. Technically, What If doesn't have filler, because it's an anthology series with self-contained episodes. That's true for the source material. The What If comics have no connections between issues, so you can read them in any order. If the premise of one particular issue sounds boring, you can skip it, and it's fine. You won't miss anything, since each story begins and ends in 24 pages. There are bad What If comics with ridiculous premises, but you can't call them filler because you decide which ones to read or skip. But the show is different. The episodes usually connect at the end of each season, where all the characters team up against a massive multiverse-level threat. Just like in the movies, the series makes you feel like you have to watch everything to stay up to date. If you skip the episode where Howard the Duck and Darcy have a baby. You won't understand where Birdie came from, because the final episodes don't explain her backstory. And if you haven't watched the previous seasons, you won't know why Captain Carter is traveling through the multiverse, or who Kahori is.
These timelines are so confusing.
This approach works for continuity, but the problem comes when we have to sit through episodes that add nothing to the overarching plot, and aren't even good standalone stories. If this were a real anthology, we could skip episodes like Agatha Goes to Hollywood, or the Bucky and Red Guardian parody, or the one where the Avengers drive mechs to fight gamma monsters. We'd only watch the episodes that actually interest us, just like we can with the comics. But since the series has continuity, we feel obligated to watch every episode, which makes it even more disappointing when some have no connection to the season finale. They end up feeling like bad filler. This doesn't happen in Creature Commandos. This show has a typical episode of the week structure, where a new problem is introduced and resolved within the same episode. But at the same time, the overarching story of the season keeps moving forward, and we learn more about the characters. For example, episode 5 shows Frankenstein's backstory. We get to know him better. We understand his obsession with the bride. We may laugh at some of his awkward comments. And we also find out he killed a gypsy woman who had helped him after a deadly fight with the bride. This might seem like filler, because the gypsy and her dog are never mentioned again. But the flashback makes it clear that Eric is a dangerous guy. He might seem likable, but he wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone except the bride. It's solid character development, something season 3 of What If is missing.
Big difference.
Plus, in the same episode, we see Eric teaming up with Rick Flag in the present and discovering that Cersei's vision of the future might be fake. Turns out, the person who convinced them to believe in Cersei was actually Clayface. This is a great twist, because the Commandos were about to assassinate the Princess of Pokelistan to prevent the apocalypse, all based on Cersei's vision. But Flag starts to believe they're making a terrible mistake. It's impossible to call this episode filler. Flag ends up with a broken back, unable to contact Waller to cancel the mission, leaving us eager to see the next episode and how the story unfolds. If you miss an episode of Creature Commandos, you don't just lose out on character development. You'll struggle to follow the plot, because every single episode pushes the story forward. There's no filler like in What If, so there's more incentive to watch each episode, and you never feel like you're wasting your precious time. And speaking about time, the third reason is episode length. Both series have episodes that run about 25 to 30 minutes, the classic runtime for animated TV shows. The difference, however, lies in how they use that time. The creators of What If clearly struggled with this format. Take episode 5, for example, which explores what would have happened if a Celestial's birth had destroyed Earth. The premise is super interesting, because we get to see a reality completely different from Universe 616. Most of the major heroes are dead. Mysterio has taken over the world, and a small group of heroes is fighting to save humanity. Maybe the team could have included characters the audience cares about more, but the premise is fresh, unique, and intriguing. Exactly what a show like What If should deliver. The problem is that 30 minutes isn't enough time to develop the story properly. We don't get to know all the characters. Mysterio barely gets any screen time, and it feels like some important scenes were cut just to fit the runtime. At the beginning of the episode, the Watcher mentions that he's seen this story play out the same way in other universes, but we never actually see what happens in those universes. We know Riri dies and Mysterio wins, sure, but the ending would have hit harder if we'd seen Riri's previous failures. But they couldn't include that scene. There just wasn't enough time. The episode also lacks an epilogue to show what happens to this universe now that Mysterio is dead. Is Ironheart the only hero left? Do people start trusting the Avengers again? Are there other villains ready to take Mysterio's place? This kind of follow-up isn't always necessary, but it is in a completely different universe like this one. And this isn't the only example. The episode with Red Guardian and Bucky has funny moments, but they literally cut out the final battle. Instead of seeing these two team up to fight their old bosses, the scene just ends abruptly. There's not even a slideshow or a recap, nothing. We only find out that Bucky got captured and Red Guardian now works for the US. It's like cutting the helicarrier fight from Winter Soldier and jumping straight to Cap's meeting with Nick Fury. It's ridiculous.
Ridiculous!
This could have been solved with longer episodes, or by telling stories that don't feel rushed in 30 minutes, like Creature Commandos does. This series plays it safer with the formula we mentioned earlier, but none of the episodes feel rushed. There are always flashbacks, funny moments, emotional scenes, great action, and every episode ends on a cliffhanger. They don't cut important scenes to fit the runtime. If an episode needs more time to tell the story properly, they simply make it longer. They don't have to stick to TV timing restrictions since the show goes straight to streaming. For instance, episode 5 is the shortest at 22 minutes because it focuses on Rick Flag and Frankenstein, and the rest of the group doesn't get much screen time. time. But the final episode runs 29 minutes because it needed the extra time to wrap everything up. They had to show Nina's origin to make us cry over her unfair death, reveal the twist about the princess, and deliver her incredibly satisfying defeat. And on top of all that, there was an epilogue introducing a new team of monsters. If the episode had been shorter, the story would have felt rushed. And that brings us to the fourth reason, the most important of all, expectations. What If is a total letdown, especially considering all the potential it had. The first two seasons had their ups and downs, with good and bad episodes, but they generally did a good job exploring the idea of what if the MCU story had been just a little different. From Hank Pym killing the Avengers before the team could even form, to seeing what would happen if Ultron had won, the concept worked. They had hundreds of amazing ideas to explore, and the hype was actually pretty high because fans wanted to see some crazy stuff. Like, what if the other half of the universe got snapped? What if Iron Man had survived the events of Endgame? Or what if Thanos had won? They could have even adapted cool comic stories, like Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. What if Elektra had survived? Or the one where Strange becomes Dormammu's disciple?
I would like to see that.
But instead, they decided to go with the most boring ideas ever. Who cares about seeing Darcy pregnant? Who wants to watch Agatha singing and dancing with Kingo? On top of that, the stories that seemed to have some potential were executed terribly, like the one about the mechs, or the one with Bucky and Red Guardian. The ideas weren't bad. They could have been interesting if they were written well, but the scripts are awful. They feel like they were written by preschoolers. It's like they just threw the episodes together to get them over with, especially since the series wasn't going to have any real consequences for the future of the MCU. And if that wasn't bad enough, during the credits of the final episode, we see ideas that were way more interesting and just went nowhere, like Six-Armed Spider-Man or Samurai Ghost Rider. Those two ideas alone had more potential than all the episodes this season. They also didn't include the Fantastic Four or the X-Men, except for Storm in the last two episodes. And Spider-Man only shows up in one episode in the entire show. What's the point of that? And don't even try to defend Marvel here. Beau DeMaio, the showrunner for X-Men 97, who was canceled on social media, revealed that the What If team was allowed to use the mutants. But they didn't, because they didn't feel like it. It's such a shame because Marvel had the chance to really make the most of the multiverse, giving us stories that wouldn't make sense in the main continuity and will make even less sense once the multiverse saga wraps up with Secret Wars. We all had high hopes for What If because it had the potential to be one of Marvel's best shows, but it ended up being one of the most wasted opportunities, right up there with Secret Invasion. With Creature Commandos, the opposite happened. It's a show no one asked for, starring characters most people didn't even know existed. It had all the signs of being another unnecessary show that no one would care to watch. Just like a lot of Marvel's recent projects, there aren't even many connections to the rest of the DCU, aside from a couple of 2-second cameos, because the new DC universe is set to kick off in a big way with Superman. But this show completely exceeded expectations. Some James Gunn hater might say this doesn't count for much because it's just an animated ripoff of the Suicide Squad. Once again, we have a team of misfit anti-heroes sent on secret missions by Amanda Waller. But since the characters are so well done and their interactions are solid, the series is actually a lot of fun. Who would have thought Frankenstein's bride would end up leading the group, and we wouldn't even miss Rick Flag in the final episode. I wasn't expecting to get emotional over a killer robot's backstory, and I definitely didn't think I'd laugh at the jokes from one of Batman's third-string villains. I didn't even expect the animation to be good, but it turned out better than What If, and it surpassed Invincible Season 2. A lot of us started watching Creature Commandos just to stay up to date with the new DCU, like homework, but we ended up being blown away by how good it was. This project proves that quality matters more than anything else, and if James Gunn keeps this up, not only will he revive the DC brand, but he might actually catch up to and even surpass Marvel in the near future. We explain how he can pull it off in 2025 in this video over here.
Get out of here!